Hey! Welcome back to my channel where I question history as we know it, or if I don't know it. If you're new here, it's wonderful to have you. I hope you enjoy the show, and if you do, you know what to do. Most likely, you've seen part 1 of this series entitled, Why Was the Third Earliest Party in the United States Opposed to Freemasonry? And if not, you should do that now and come back here later. Look for the tab at the top of this video, or the link will be in the description box below. To continue our story, we will begin where we left off. After Morgan's assumed abduction from the jail at Canandaigua, not having been seen or heard from actual friends or family again. The next day, being September 13, 1826, Morgan's wife Lucinda and George Ketchum, whom she had traveled with, arrived at Canandaigua about noon. Ketchum took the papers Lucinda had brought and said he would go about making inquiries on Morgan's location. It wasn't until later that evening that Lucinda was told that Morgan had been held overnight in jail and that a man from Pennsylvania had come, paid his bail, and carried him off into the night. Lucinda was of course upset, and to console her, Ketchum told her that Morgan would not be killed, that he would just be concealed until they could get the rest of the papers. He told her to try to get the rest from Mr. Miller, and that would surely lead her to Morgan's secret location. Lucinda had been traveling with her 2-month-old baby and was eager to return to Batavia since she had left her toddler there. Ketchum took the papers, left her money to travel home, and promised to write if he heard any word on Morgan's location. During Lucinda's ride home, Freemason and tavern owner James Ganson got into her carriage to tell her that he was on his way to Batavia to, quote, make arrangements for her support. He told her that her husband was alive, but not to be surprised if she didn't see him for a year or two, or even ever again, and that she and her children would be taken care of. When Lucinda had only been home for a few hours, a Freemason by the name of Thomas McCulley, whose name had been on the claim Morgan was arrested for back in August, told Lucinda he had been sent from the lodge to offer her boarding at Mr. Denold's tavern, the same place that her husband and Mr. Miller had been taken to immediately after their arrests in the last 2 days. She let McCulley know that she would not be accepting any help from Freemasons, since they are who she believed was behind all of her troubles currently. Initially, it seems that the excitement of the Morgan disappearance was delayed due to the respectability of the men who had been involved. For example, Mr. Lawson was a local farmer, Mr. Chesborough owned a hat and cap store, and Colonel Sawyer was a saddle and harness maker. In contrast, Morgan had a habit of drinking too much and getting himself into debt. Days pass and no Morgan. On September 18th, Miller publishes a long account of his treatment by the Freemasons, and the probable murder of Morgan in his paper. Finally, an agent was sent out from Batavia who took depositions from Mrs. Hall, the jailer's wife, and others who corroborated her story, having also heard Morgan's screams of murder. Even Morgan's cellmate, when he was being held at Canandaigua, stated Morgan had expressed his concern about leaving the jail with the gentleman who had come to bail him out, Mr. Lawson, and his Masonic affiliation. Rumors swirled as more details came forth, and the citizens of Batavia and the surrounding counties became increasingly worried about the fate of Morgan. Based on the information at hand, which included the attempted arson, Miller's strange arrest, witnesses' statements, and Lucinda's interactions with several Masons, the people began to feel Morgan had come to harm specifically because of his writings. On September 23rd, a group of citizens met in the Ontario Hotel to discuss their concerns. There, the attendees denounced Freemasonry, linking its secretive nature to Morgan's disappearance. Calls for an investigation were made, and committees were formed. These committees immediately went to work gathering evidence, conducting formal inquiries, organizing legal proceedings, and raising public awareness of the so-called Morgan affair. On October 4th, another meeting was held, and this time Judge Addison Gardner agreed to conduct an official inquiry into Morgan's disappearance. A committee of 10 of the citizens of Batavia issued the following address to the public. On the 11th day of September, William Morgan, a native of Virginia, who had for about 3 years past resided in this village, was, under pretext of a justice warrant, hurried from his home and family and carried to Canandaigua. The same night he was examined on the charge of petite larceny and discharged by the justice. One of the persons who took him away immediately obtained a warrant against him in a civil suit for an alleged debt of $2, on which he was committed to the jail of Ontario County. On the night of the 12th of September, he was released by a person pretending to be his friend, but directly in front of the jail, notwithstanding his cries of murder, he was gagged and secured and put into a carriage, and after having traveled all night, he was left, as the driver of the carriage says, at Hansford Landing, about sunrise on the 13th, since which he has not been heard of. His distressed wife and 2 infant children are left dependent on charity for their sustenance. The circumstances of the transaction have given rise to the most violent fears that he has been murdered. It is, however, hoped by his wife and friends that he may be kept concealed and imprisoned in Canada. All persons who are willing to serve the cause of humanity and assist to remove the distressing apprehensions of his unfortunate wife are earnestly requested to one of the committee named below, directed to this place any facts or circumstances which have come to their knowledge and are calculated to lead to the discovery of his present situation, or the particulars of his fate if he has been murdered. The committees immediately requested the help of the governor, DeWitt Clinton, who responded by issuing 2 proclamations. One on October 7th, encouraging state officers and ministers of justice to pursue all appropriate and efficient measures for the arrest of the offenders and the prevention of further incidents. When the committee reached out again, he responded with a second proclamation on the 26th of October, offering a reward up to $300 for information leading to the discovery and conviction of the offenders. With the mystery still unsolved, in November, at the Court of General Sessions, the grand jury could find nothing more than 2 indictments against Nicholas Chesborough, Lowton Lawson, Colonel Sawyer, and John Sheldon for conspiracy to kidnap and confine William Morgan, with their trials set for January 1827. By the end of 1826, Morgan's much-anticipated work was published under the title Illustrations of Masonry by one of the fraternity who has devoted 30 years to the subject. Miller wrote an introduction stating that Morgan had been carried away from his village by Freemasons. He heavily criticized Freemasonry, portraying it as an outdated and unnecessary institution. He encouraged the reader to use the book as a key to unlock the secrets of Freemasonry and judge for oneself. It became a bestseller and contributed to the already heightened tensions in local communities, particularly in areas with a significant Masonic presence. If you're curious, there's a link to a free digital copy I found in the description box so you can check it out yourself. In January of 1827, with much fanfare and public interest, the trial of Nicholas Chesborough, Lowton Lawson, Edward Sawyer, and John Sheldon began. Accounts claim that there were over 100 witnesses subpoenaed, with Miller being one, but he didn't show up, leading people to believe that he had been bribed or blackmailed. At least 2 witnesses refused to testify, and then afterwards skipped town. The governor had asked in a letter back in December for the Attorney General's attendance, but he also didn't show up. A team of lawyers were paid for by Masonic lodges to defend those being tried. One of these lawyers, John C. Spencer, would later become the second special counsel appointed to investigate the Morgan affair, and even later still an anti-Mason himself. More on that later. The trial only lasted 6 days, and at least one account states that it was on Spencer's advice that Chesborough, Lawson, and Sawyer all pled guilty. But they claim no knowledge of Morgan's whereabouts and disclosed no new information in their sworn statements. They received their sentences from Judge Enos Throop, who would later become the governor. At this time, kidnapping was only a misdemeanor, so the public was extremely dissatisfied with the results of the trial, the longest sentence being 2 years for Lowton Lawson. Chesborough was sentenced to a year, and Sawyer only 1 month. John Sheldon admitted to the conspiracy, but denied having been involved at all. He was given 3 months. This concludes part 2 of Why was the third earliest party in the United States opposed to Freemasonry? If you are enjoying this and would like to support my content in other ways besides hitting that like button and subscribing, comment below to let me know what you think. You can also find the links to my Cashapp and Patreon in the description box. See you in part 3! Wait, I can't see you. And you can't see me, so I guess it's more like you can hear more of this story in part 3.